Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So we're going to continue on with our discussion of Mumuksupadi. We're discussing Mumuksupadi and we're going through it. What we've decided to do is we have a translation of Mumuksupadi by Patricia Mummy. We're going to go through that. And we also have a very short commentary by P.B. Anangacharya on the internet. When we get to the actual first sutras, we'll be looking at that also. So again, this is just a discussion, and so if anybody wants to make a comment or ask a question at any time, they're free to just chime in, just unmute and let me know. So last time we looked at the first chapter. I guess it was an introduction to Mumuksupadi, and here we have the second chapter, which talks a little bit about the idea of the Rahasya commentaries. And I think we mentioned this before, that in Sri Vaishnava literature, these esoteric books are called Rahasya Granthas, or esoteric or secret doctrines that have been written down. So there's a history to this type of work, these types of works in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. With some certainty, we can fix a date by which all three mantras were accepted, right? So the three mantras, again, that we're talking about are the Tiru Astakshara mantra, or otherwise known as Tiru mantra, or Astaksharam, the 8-syllable Narayana mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya. The second mantra is the Dvaya mantra, which is consisting of Dvaya means two parts. There are two parts to it. Sriman Narayana Charano Sharanam Prapadye Srimate Narayanaya Namaha. And the third mantra is the Charama Sloka, or the final order of Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, verse 66 of the 18th chapter. Sarvadharman Parichaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayishami Masuchaha. So these are the three mantras which we're talking about. And these will be, of course, there'll be different chapters in Mumuksupadi about each mantra, going into the meaning of them in detail. So what, first of all, as a scholar, this Patricia Mummy is a scholar, so she's writing about trying to fix the date of these mantras. Now, as Sri Vaishnavas, we understand that we discussed this before when we're discussing the Guru Parampara, that the first mantra, Tiru mantra, or the Om Namo Narayana mantra, was spoken by the Lord himself in the form of Narayana Rishi to his disciple, who is also a manifestation of himself, an avatar of himself, called Nara Rishi, at the place called Bhadrika Ashrama, which is up in the Himalayas past Rishikesh and Hardwar. There are 4 places up there which are considered to be quite holy. These they're called Chadam Yatra. Sometimes people go on to all the 4 places. They are Badrinath, Kedarnath, Gangotri, and Yamunotri, or the sources of the Ganges and the Yamuna rivers. A Shiva temple called Kedarnath, and the Badrinath is a Vishnu temple up there where they do have deities of Narayan Rishis. So at that place, northern Badrinath, and it's interesting that even in South India we have like sometimes you see in the West, they have people who are mayors of different cities. They'll have sister cities in other countries that they have some relationship with. So in South India, they also have the sister places in South India, which are said to correspond to the places in northern India. So the place that corresponds to Bhadrika Ashram in the Himalayas in southern India is called Melkote, or Tirunarayanapuram. It's called Tirunarayanapuram because the deity there is Tirunarayana, and the mantra used is the Tirunarayana mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya. So that is called Melkote. That's in Karnataka state near Mysore, where Dr. Alwa's family are from. And anyway, it's a holy place, and one of 4 major places out of the 108 holy places that the Alwas have spoken about in the 4,000 Divya Prabandhas. These 4 places are considered very, very important to Sri Vaishnavas. And each day when we do Sandhya Vandanam, we turn and face the directions of those 4 places. So Sri Rangamangala Nidim Karuna Nivasam for Sri Rangam in the south, Sri Venkatadri Shikaralaya Kala Megam, Sri Venkatadri means Tirupati in the north, Sri Hastishela Shikarojvala Parijatam, that is Kanchipuram, Vishnu Kanchi. There's 2 parts to Kanchipuram, but the Vishnu Kanchi part where the Varadraj Perumal temple of is in that is in the east, and Sri Sham Namami Shirasha Yadushaila Deepam. Yadushaila Deepam is also called Melkote or Tirunarayanapuram in the west in Karnataka. So these are the 4 directions and the 4 places that we pray to it during Sandhya Vandanam 3 times a day. Very, very important places. So Tirunarayanapuram is a very important place. It's the southern Indian version of Bhadragashram. So the Om Namo Narayana mantra is very important there because it was very important in Bhadragashram. That's where it was spoken. So there are some other places, for instance, Madurai in South India, in Tamil Nadu, is the southern Indian Mathura. Same, actually in Tamil, Madura is the same letters. So Mathura and Madurai in South India are considered to be equivalent. So there are some other things which are considered equivalent to like that, other places. But anyway, getting back to the point, we have those 3 mantras. The first one, Tira Mantra, Astakshara Mantra, was spoken by Narayana Rishi to Nara, his disciple in Bhadragashram. The Dwaya Mantra, Sriman Narayana Charano Sharam Papadi, etc., it was spoken by the Supreme Lord in Vaikuntha to his divine consort Mahalakshmi, Sri Devi. And the last one, of course, was spoken by Lord Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, which is north of Delhi in northern India, in Uttar Pradesh, Kurukshetra, which is also considered a holy place. And that's where they had that big battle between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. So that was spoken on the battlefield at that time by Lord Krishna. So there are some other mantras also. There are other final orders. The Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna is the final order of Lord Krishna, but there's also a final order of Lord Rama. There's also a final order of Lord Varaha. And these Varaha and Rama Charma Slokas are also discussed by Sri Vaishnavas, but they're not as prominent as the Bhagavad Gita verse 66 of the 18th chapter, the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna. So normally when we read the Rahasya commentaries, to get back to the subject, which is the Rahasya or the esoteric doctrine books, the books of esoteric doctrines mainly deal with these 3 mantras. There are some other books, like Vedanta Deshika has written a book called Abhaya Pradana Saram, which I have here, which would be very nice to go through with Dr. Tirunarayan, because I believe he's studied that quite extensively. And that is all about Vibhishana Sharanagati. Sharanagati, of course, means property or surrender to the Lord. And Vibhishana was the brother of Ravana, who actually defected from the side of Ravana during the time of when Ravana had kidnapped Sita and taken her to Sri Lanka. And he defected during the war, and he changed sides and came over to Lord Rama's side and surrendered to Lord Rama. And his surrender to Lord Rama is part of many, many different surrenders that go on in the Ramayana, which is why Ramayana, which we were reading in Srivachana Bhushana by Pillai Lokacharya, is considered to be the greatest Shastra, just below the Vedas, let's say, which are the eternal greatest Shastras. But the Ramayana is considered to be a very great Shastra in Sri Vaishnavas because it deals with Sharanagati or property or surrender to the Lord in many, many aspects. The greatest form of surrender there in the Ramayana is, of course, Vibhishan's surrender to Lord Rama, in which Lord Rama gives his final order, which is Sakrideva Prapannaya Travasmiti Chayachite Abhayam Sarvabhutebhyo Dadamni Tat Vratam Mama, that he says that I will if you just simply say I'm yours one time only, if someone says I am yours, then I vouchsafe that I will free all living entities from all fear, and I will free him from all fear of all living entities. The word sarva bhute bhyo there can be either ablative or dative. It can be sort of a bhute bhyo, can be plural, dative or ablative. So anyway, it can be described in different ways. But we're not here to talk about that particular Charma Sloka, nor the Charma Sloka of Lord Varaha, in which Lord Varaha says that even if you don't remember me at the time of death, I will save you. Because Ham Smarami Mad Bhakta, Lord Varaha says that I will remember my Bhakta, even if that person is unconscious or in a coma or cannot remember me at the time of death, which was a very important point for Ramanuja, who asked that question because he was really bothered by the statement in the Bhagavad Gita that you have to remember God at the time of death. This doctrine of remembering God at the time of death is called Antima Shmriti. Antima means the last, at the end. And it means that, of course, the soul is eternal, but still we move from different body to body in the cycle of samsara, birth and death. So at the end of one life, at the end of one body, right, there are some final moments before a person dies when it's common to say that the most important thing to a person in his life flashes before his eyes, or he thinks about the most important thing in his life right when he's dying. This is a very common thing. And so Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, yam yam vapi smaran bhavan, right, that whatever you think of at the time of death, that you will attain. So this is very common understanding in the scriptures, and it's definitely there in the scriptures that if you think of whatever's most important to you is what you will think of at the time of death, and then you'll be carried by that impression, by the thought in your subtle body. The subtle body will be carried to another birth, to a different birth, according to what you think of. So Lord Krishna says, if you think of me, you'll come to me. If you think of the demigods, you'll go to the demigods. If you think of the forefathers, you'll go to the forefathers. Whatever you think of. It's very common that we follow our thoughts, thinking, feeling, willing, follow on from each other. So it's very common that we, in this life, I have a desire to go and do something, and then I go and do it. So thinking always initiates our actions. Okay, so Lord Varaha is saying that you don't actually have to bother thinking of me at the time of death, even though the rest of the scriptures do say that you should try to think of the Lord at the time of death. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. And that's definitely something that everybody should aspire to do. And not only at the time of death, but always. We should always be thinking of the Lord, right? But at the same time, if we don't remember the Lord, right, at the time of death, which can be a very difficult time for most people, so then the Lord Varaha says, even if you can't remember me at the time of death, I will remember you, because you are my devotee. You've surrendered unto me, right? So that's the other Charma Sloka of Lord Varaha. There are some other very important slokas also, and very important mantras in Sri Vaishnavism, but we won't go into them. The main three mantras, which are going to be explained in Mumuksupadi and in most Rahasya Granthas or esoteric doctrine books, are these three mantras that we just described before, from the Tira mantra, the Dvaya mantra, and the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna. So around, she's sort of got this idea of what the date is for these different mantras. But as I said, the Narayan Rishis, Narayana spoke. We don't know when that happened, that occurred. That's a Puranic story, and also when the Lord spoke, there's no use to talking about when the Lord spoke the Dvaya mantra to Mahalakshmi in Vaikuntha, because there's no real time in Vaikuntha. Time is a material element, so it's not really there in Vaikuntha in the same way that it is here. So these are just guesses by modern scholars as to when these mantras came into use in Vaishnavism, and so they give their guesses according to that. So that sort of thing is interesting, but it's not essential for our understanding of the meaning of the mantra. And I think we can say that There are many discussions about the scholastic idea of certain dates of people and doctrines and mantras. And there's also the devotional, traditional dates that are ascribed to those things by devotees and Vaishnavas and Vaishnava scholars. And those things don't often coincide, but sometimes they do. But whether they coincide or whether they don't coincide, what's really important is not the time or the place or that these things were spoken or these people lived, but it's the doctrines and the philosophy and practices that they gave to us. So whether Lord Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita on a Tuesday afternoon at a certain place at a certain time is not as important as the real message of the Bhagavad Gita and the doctrines that he propounded. So these are all things that are interesting, but not essential to our understanding, again, of the esoteric meaning of the mantras. So it'd be nice to have, some sort of date or some idea of when the mantras were spoken by different people, or when what we're really trying to understand in this particular part of this book is we're going to try to understand how the different esoteric doctrines got written down, because before they were written down, they were spoken only by the guru to the disciple, and sometimes not even to all his disciples, but only to a favorite disciple or a disciple who had the ability to understand that level of secret doctrine. So we can certainly fix a date by which all three mantras were accepted and used as a unit by the Sri Vaishnava community. Around the middle of the 12th century, meaning the 1100s, Parasara Bhatta means just after Ramanuja, because Ramanuja was born in 1017 CE, and he is said to have lived for 120 years until 1127. Okay, so 1127 would be the first quarter of the 12th century. So in the 12th century, Parasara Bhatta, who was the son of Kuradalwan or Kuresh, Ramanuja's chief scribe, so he was like a secretary to Ramanuja. If anybody's familiar with the life of Ramanuja, Ramanuja heard that there were commentaries, there were more ancient commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras, and he had promised after Yamunacharya had passed away and Ramanuja had come to meet him and take initiation from him. The story goes that that Yamuna had actually three fingers clenched in one hand, sort of indicating that there were three things that Yamunacharya had left undone for Ramanuja to fulfill. And Ramanuja took those three fingers being closed as being three things that he had to do. One of them was to write, the most important one was to write a proper Vaishnava commentary on the Vedanta Sutra of Badarayana or Vedavyas, who has systematically gone through the subject matter of the Vedanta Sutra, of the Upanishads, the Upanishads being the highest and eternal scriptures, the end of the Vedas or Vedanta. And so the philosophy of the Upanishads, if you read the Upanishads, the subject matters are all over the place. And so what Vedavyas did was he decided to write sutras, aphorisms, very short texts, which give in a logical order and sequential order the philosophical meaning of the Upanishads. And those are called Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras. So each school of philosophy coming after that, including Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, Nimbarka, Vallabha, Chaitanya, all of these different schools that have come after that. And there are some others, also Srikara, who has a Shaiva Vishishtadvaita philosophy. Each founder of a particular philosophical school of Vedanta, a flavor of Vedanta, let's say, after Shankara, has had to make a commentary on those sutras of Vedavyas, called the Badarayana Sutras or the Vyasa Sutras or the Vedanta Sutras, or also called Brahma Sutras. So Ramanuja knew that he had to do that. That was one of the promises that he made to fulfill of Yamunacharya, his grand spiritual master. his Param Guru. And the other two were to glorify Vedavyasa and his father Parasara Rishi by naming some of his disciples after those persons. And so here we're talking about in the 12th century Parasara Bhatta, who's named after Parasara Rishi, the father of Vedavyasa, to honor Parasara Rishi, the father of Vedavyasa. So Ramanuja named these two twin boys of sons of Kurutalwan, Vedavyasa Bhatta and Parasara Bhatta, to honor Vedavyasa and his father Parasara Rishi. Okay, so Parasara Bhatta was this Kurutalwan, their father, was a scribe or secretary of Ramanuja, and Ramanuja, in his effort to search out all the old commentaries on Vedanta Sutra in order to base his commentary on the previous Acharya's commentaries, because normally we don't write a commentary with our own idea, but we read the previous Acharya's commentaries, and if we have something that we can elaborate on their philosophical interpretation, we do. We can elaborate on it. We can go into more detail, but we should always be following Mahajano Yena Gata Sapantaha. It says in the Mahabharata, we should try to follow in the footsteps of the previous gurus, previous acharyas. So Ramanuja wanted to do that too. He wanted to give a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. He wanted to follow the previous acharyas. So one of the previous acharyas, he mentions in his Vedanta Sutra, Dravida, Tanka, Guha Dev. There are some other acharyas which he followed. There was one specific acharya which he heard that there was an ancient commentary. He wanted to read that, and that acharya was called Bodhayana. So the Bodhayana commentary on the Vedanta Sutras was being kept in a palm leaf manuscript in Kashmir. So Ramanuja went to Kashmir by walk in those days. So you can imagine how far it is from Tamil Nadu to Kashmir. And he went by walk. In those days, of course, sannyasis used to walk. Even today, there are some sannyasis of the Advaita sannyasis who still, they'll only walk. And so he went to Kashmir in order to go to the Sharda Peetham, which is a temple there, where they worship Sharda Devi. It's a deity of Parvati or Devi, Lord Shiva's wife. Because in Kashmir, they used to have Kashmir Shaivism, Kashmir Shaktism, and Kashmir Vaishnavism. So Ramanuja went there to especially access that work and read it. So he and Kurutalwar, they both read the book. They were not able to take a copy of the book, but Kurutalwar memorized the book. And so when Ramanuja wrote his Shribhasya, he had Kurutalwar take the dictation. So Ramanuja would speak what he wanted Kurutalwar to write, and therefore it's said here that Kurutalwar was his scribe. Just like Ganesh is the scribe of Vedavyasa. So when Vedavyasa wrote down all the scriptures and things, he asked Ganesh to write them down. And the deal that Ramanuja had with Kurutalwar was because Kurutalwar had memorized the commentary of Bodhayana in Kashmir. So the deal that he made with him was, you write down what I say in my commentary, but if I say something which contradicts Bodhayana, and you know in your memory of the whole Bodhayana Vritti, the whole commentary of Bodhayana, if I say something that contradicts the previous acharya, then you please stop, and we'll discuss that point before we go on, and we'll make sure that what I've put down follows Bodhayana, like that. And it's actually said that during the time when Ramanuja was writing, or Kurutalwar was writing this down, that he did stop a few times and he said to Ramanuja, we should talk about this because this is what Bodhayana says, and you're saying this. And Ramanuja adjusted, his writing, his writing according to what the previous acharya had said, Bodhayana. Okay, so that's just a little aside story. Sorry about that. We'll get back to the point of the Rahasya commentaries, which were written, of course, much after Kurutalwar. But anyway, Kurutalwar was the main disciple of Ramanuja, and he was like his secretary and his scribe. So Parasara, in the middle of the 12th century, Parasara Bhatta, the son of Kurutalwar or Kuresh, Ramanuja's chief scribe, wrote the first commentary. the first commentary on the three mantras, his Ashta Shloki. So he wrote a very short stotra of 8 slokas, eight verses. So, and she's going to give that in the appendix of this book, which we can see. And this is considered to be the first attempt by somebody to actually write down the secret understandings. Okay. Unlike most of the later commentaries in Manipravala prose, and again, Manipravala is the mixture of Sanskrit and Tamil. It's Sanskrit words with Tamil endings. So just like sometimes we use some words like guru and karma when we're speaking in English. In Tamil Nadu, in people who are Sri Vaishnavas, they use also many Sanskrit words, just like we're using Sanskrit words as we go through. To explain them, they just use them in their normal discussion of Tamil. So this Manipravala is a medieval language which is a cross between Tamil and Sanskrit. It literally means pearls and coral. It's a beautiful mixture of pearls and coral, like a necklace that a lady would wear. His work consists of 8 slokas. Right. So that's what I said. The Asta Sloka means 8 slokas. 4 of these interpret the Tiru mantra. So out of the 8 slokas, 4, a full half of that book or that stotra is about the Tiru mantra. So that we can see the Tiru mantra is very, very important, the first mantra. And because Parasarabhadra, the first person to write this type of commentary, he's dedicated a full half of his eight verses to that, to just explaining the Tiru mantra. And then 2 each are given to explanation of the Dvaya mantra and the Charma sloka. Inclusion of the Charma sloka, referred to as the last words, or Charma Vakyam, Vakyam would mean words, of the charioteer, Krishna, right? Krishna is known by the name Partha Sarati. Sarati, Partha is the name of Arjuna, and Sarati means his charioteer, or his if we have if you have a limousine, you have a driver or a taxi driver. He's the driver. He's the chauffeur. He's Arjuna's chauffeur. And this was, of course, because during the battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna himself was a Kshatriya, and he had a big army, and that army went to fight on the other side. There was a discussion about who Krishna should fight with, and who Krishna's army should fight with. And the Krishna's army was sent to fight with the Kauravas, and the Pandavas preferred to have Lord Krishna themselves. But even then, the Kauravas said, no, it would be unfair if Krishna himself fights. So he has to take a non-combatant role. So he has to be only a chariot driver, and he's not supposed to pick up any weapons. So the last of Charioteer Krishna shows that at least by this date, it was accepted to be one among the other mantras. One among the other mantras. So by what date? What does she talk about? She's talking about the middle of the 12th century. Middle of the 12th century, which is just after Ramanuja, because Ramanuja lived up to the first quarter of the 12th century. Okay, so by that time it was accepted as a mantra, not just as a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, but as a specific mantra explaining property, explaining Sharanagati, a separate upaya, a separate method of reaching moksha than the other methods taught in the Bhagavad Gita, which are karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga. The path of action, the path of wisdom, and the path of devotion. So the text of Astasloki is very cryptic. So obviously there'll be some commentaries on Astasloki. I would be very surprised if Vedanta Deshika hadn't written a commentary on it. Probably has. I haven't looked into it exactly, but we can look into that and see if Astasloki, who has written commentaries on Astasloki. So it's considered very cryptic. Indeed, it would be impossible to translate without a knowledge of the Rahasya commentarial tradition. This would suggest that it is a summary of an existent body of oral tradition surrounding these mantras rather than a groundbreaking work. Okay, so that's the point. That's the point. The point is okay. Parasarabhatta starts off. He's got the first text. This is an important point that's being made here. What does it mean? That Parasarabhatta has the first written text of a book on very short and cryptic book of 8 slokas, 8 verses on the esoteric doctrines of these 3 mantras. Right? Now, the very fact that it's very short and very cryptic, very difficult to understand, means that there must have been necessarily an oral tradition before that being passed down by the different acharyas, right? Explaining this in more detail. Nobody writes a very cryptic, small cryptic stotra without there being some explanation of it. So it's obvious that there should be some explanation at that time also. There must have been, even at that time or before that time, an explanation. So she's saying it's impossible to translate without a knowledge of a wider understanding of these mantras. So therefore, we can understand that even before that time, that was there. So we have some Western scholars who don't believe that Prapatti or Sharanagati as a separate means to moksha was being taught by Yamunacharya or by Ramanuja. And we dealt with that in the previous chapter of this last week, that and we dismissed that because we can see by the Sharanagati Gadya and by the 31st verse of the Gitartha Sangraha by Yamunacharya and the Sharanagati Gadya by Ramanuja, that actually Sharanagati or Prapatti is being taught secretly by, not so secretly even, you can see it in their works, right? But we understand that they must have been teaching it, Prapatti or Sharanagati, as a separate upaya, as a separate means, and not just as a part of Bhakti Yoga, which is what most other Vaishnavas consider it to be, right? Because in Bhakti Yoga we have Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu-smaranam, Parasevanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. Atmanivedanam means completely surrendering to the Lord. So that is also a description of Prapatti. So many people take Prapatti to be an anga or a part of Bhakti Yoga, but the uniqueness of Sri Vaishnavism and the uniqueness of Yamunacharya and Ramanuja and the following acharyas in their secret doctrines, like Parasarabhatta, etc., is that they have shown categorically and that Prapatti can be practiced as a separate upaya. It can be a separate means to moksha. And this is a very important point on which the whole doctrines and principles of Sri Vaishnavism are based, basically. Okay, so this would suggest that it is a summary of the existent body of oral traditions surrounding these mantras rather than a groundbreaking work. So her original statement that this is the first work that we see, but by looking at that work, by analyzing that work by Parasarabhatta, we understand that there must have been, if not a written, but at least an oral tradition explaining that in more detail because it's so short and cryptic. All the later Sri Vaishnava commentaries seem to follow its general scheme of interpretation. So again, this verse, this Astasloki book by Parasara Bhatta is groundbreaking in the sense that it's being written down. It's also groundbreaking because it's very cryptic. It's very difficult to understand without an elaborate commentary, which obviously was there, at least in an oral tradition. And it also is groundbreaking because it sets out the method by which we understand these mantras. First, we understand the meaning of the Tira mantra. Secondly, the Dvaya mantra. And thirdly, the Charma Sloka of Lord Krishna. And even within those mantras, obviously the first part of Tira mantra, second, Om, Namo, and Narayanaya are taken up logically and sequentially. The same thing with the Dvaya mantra. Dvaya mantra is taken up sequentially, and the same thing with the Charma Sloka of Krishna. Everything is taken up sequentially, word by word. Meanings are given, and phrases are explained as they come in the mantras. So all the later Sri Vaishnava commentaries seem to follow the general scheme of its interpretation, or rather, they follow the same oral tradition out of which Parasara's own work arose, right? Which we don't know about because it was oral, and it wasn't that the full explanation at the time of Yamuna and Ramanuja, and even in the 12th century of Parasara Bhatta, not until later on, which we're going to hear about now, not until later on, it was written down. The full explanations were written down. But as she says, Parasara Bhatta's work, Astastloki, was written down. It's the first one, but it was very cryptic. So Nanjir, now who's Nanjir again? Right, so we have the Lord in Vaikuntha, Srimad Narayana. The next person in the Guru Parampara is Mahalakshmi. Next person is Vishvaksena, the Senai Mudaliyar in Tamil, the Lord's secretary or the head chief of general of Lord Vishnu's army, right? And he is an incarnation he incarnates as Namalwar, the head of the Alwars. After Namalwar, we have Natamuni, who resurrected the 4,000 Divya Prabandham of the Tamil Vedas and Tamil prayers of the Alwars, right? And then we have Pundarikaksha, also known as Uyakonda, and another Vaishnava, and then we have Yamunacharya, and then Perinambi, and then Ramanuja. Okay, so after Ramanuja, then we had Govinda, who was Embar, who was Ramanuja's cousin. Then Parasara Bhatta, right? After Parasara Bhatta, we have Nanjir. So the disciple of Parasara Bhatta is being called here Nanjir. Nanjir again means my sannyasi. So Parasara Bhatta was a householder, and he had his main disciple was Nanjir, who was a sannyasi. So he used to call him my sannyasi. So that's the name he gets, Nanjir. So Nanjir, who probably wrote in the late 12th century. So if we understand that Ramanuja passed away or left his body in 1127, right? 1017 to 1127. So that's the end of the first quarter of the 12th century. Then Ramanuja, then at that time, Parasara Bhatta was, of course, a young man or a middle-aged man, like that. So Parasara Bhatta also wrote in the 12th century. And then Nanjir came along, his disciple came along, and probably wrote in the late 12th century, the late 1100s. Is the next acharya credited with a commentary on the rahasyas, on the secret mantras. And that is called the Rahasya Vivarnam Nutriyetu. When you see a double R with the line under it in Tamil, it's pronounced tra. Nutriyetu. So we can see if we go to the end and see what the footnote of 1 is. We see what the footnote of 1 is. See a little bit about that. Okay, so this is according to Periya Tirumurti Tirumuti Attaivu, the hagiographical, which means the life of saints, work of around the late 16th century, which lists the major acharyas, their gurus and disciples, and their works. See edition included as an appendix of the Arayir Apadi, a Guru Parampara Prabhavam, published by S. Krishnaswamy Iyengar of Trichy, page 590. The date of Nanjir is not well fixed, generally as early as given as early as 1113 to 1208, or as late as 1182 to 1287. For the dates of this work, I have generally followed the chronology of S. Krishnaswamy Iyengar, Iyengar's Acharya Vaibhavam, Trichy, published by the author, who gives the earlier date. That would be 1113 to 1208 for Nanjir. Right, Manavalama Muni refers to in Churna, or the Sutra 97 following, to the work Nadu Vili Tiruvidi Pillai Bhatta, disciple of Parasura Bhatta. So Parasura Bhatta had a disciple who was called the Sun Bhatta from the northern Holy Street. Nadu Vili Tiruvidi Pillai means, that's what it means. Disciple of Parasura Bhatta, and probably an older contemporary of Nanjir. So again, a disciple of Parasura Bhatta, but an older, a more senior disciple than Nanjir. Given the context, it is possible that this work was also a Rahasya commentary. Right, okay, so we'll go back to the first part here. Okay. So let's see where we're at. Okay, so from the title, I'll deal with the footnotes at the end of reading, because it's too hard to go back and forth. Because she's put all the footnotes at the end. So from the title, this would seem to be 108 Tamil stanzas. Explain, Vivarana means explanation, Rahasya means of the secrets. And this word at the end, nutrietu means 100, etu means 8. 108 Tamil stanzas explaining the three Rahasyas. Unfortunately, this work has been lost. Okay, so although we've heard of this work, we don't have it. It's what scholars call non-extant. So it doesn't exist anymore that we know of. Somebody may come up with it. It's possible because there are many, many manuscript libraries in South India, and people go through them, scholars go through them, and they find things sometimes. And not only that, but there are some manuscripts libraries in Germany and in England and different places where they've taken things. And sometimes things show up. Sometimes lost works do show up. But as far as we know, this commentary, this first commentary by Nanjir, more complex, more elaborate commentary, because Parasura Bhatta, his guru, only wrote 8 stanzas down. He wrote 108 in Tamil. Unfortunately, this work has been lost. Nanjir is more well known as the author of the commentary on Tiruvai Moli. Tiruvai Moli is the 1,000 verses out of 4,000, the great work of Namalwar. Why Namalwar is considered to be the head of the Alwars? One of the reasons is because he wrote the most out of all the other Alwars. The other Alwars have written many verses, but Namalwar wrote 1,000 out of the 4,000. So that's quite a lot. So in 9,000 gruntas. Now, when they say gruntas here, the word grunta here means verses, right? Tamil verses. They're called gruntas. The word grunta in Sanskrit means book, but here it means verses. So there are 9,000 gruntas. On the Ompati Nairapati. Okay, so Ompati Nairapati means the commentary, which a lot of these commentaries are called by the number of verses that they're in. So this one is called the 9,000. We could just call it the 9,000. It's a commentary on Tiruvai Moli written by Nanjir. Okay. So that's an aside. That doesn't really have anything to do with commentaries on the three mantras, but that's a commentary that Nanjir wrote on the work of Nam Alwar, the great work of Nam Alwar. Okay, so let's continue on. Many passages of this work reveal how the interpretation and use of these mantras, especially the Tira mantra, have become an important aspect of the Sri Vaishnava tradition. For example, in Tiruvai Moli 10.5.1, Nam Alwar says, I'm not going to attempt the Tamil, the holy name on which one should think is indeed Naranam. Naranam. So he's saying that that Nam Alwar mentions the name which one should think of. The word, the name is the Naraname, meaning it's indicating in Tamil, it's mentioning the word Narayana. Nara, the word of Nara, right? Narayana is a meaning, and that'll be explained a little bit further on. But the word Narayana includes this word Nara. So this is also a holy name. The holy name on which one should think is indeed Naranam. Nanjir, again, commenting on this line, raises the question, why Nam Alwar? See, so what she's doing is, she says, okay, we don't have that book by Nanjir that is 108 verses which directly speak about the three mantras. But we do have Nanjir's commentary on Nam Alwar's work. So there are places in Nam Alwar's work, there are places in the commentaries of the Alwars, in the Prabandhas of the Alwars, that speak about the Asakshara mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, or at least speak about the name Narayana, or at least speak about part of the name Narayana, Naranam. So let's look at those places in the Divya Prabandham of Nam Alwar, Tiruvai Moli, and let's look and see what Nanjir gave as a commentary on those parts. And then we can understand a little bit more, even though we don't have his other book, we can understand his understanding of the Om Namo Narayana mantra, because it's mentioned by Nam Alwar. So he wrote a commentary, and we have that commentary on Nam Alwar's works. So that's why she's quoting that here, just to make it very clear why she's doing that. So Nanjir, commenting on this line, raises a question, why Nam Alwar referred to the name of Narayana rather than his mantra? Why is Nam Alwar talking about chanting the name of the Lord, chanting the name of Narayana, and not chanting Om Namo Narayana? There's a difference between chanting Narayana, 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 and Om Namo Narayana. Om Namo Narayana is a mantra. The word Narayana is just the name of the Lord. So the question by the commentator in the commentary by Nanjir, the question by Nanjir is, why does Nam Alwar simply say, why does he simply say Narayana or Naranam? Why doesn't he also include the Pranava, Omkara, and the Namo, the Namaha? Om Namo Narayana. Why not? Why don't include all of it? And also the fourth case ending. The fourth case ending is the Aya, Narayanaya. So why the Aya, the Namo, and the Om are left out, and we just have Nara or Narayana? So rather than his mantra omitting the Namas, the fourth case ending, and has said Naranam instead of Narayana. The reason that Nanjir gives is that unlike other mantras, this mantra gives its results even if it is said improperly. Now that's very interesting, right? That's very interesting. So not only the Om Namo Narayana mantra gives all results, both material and spiritual, which we're going to learn about more in Mumuksupadi, but even if we say it incorrectly, it gives the results. Normally, if you say a mantra incorrectly, you don't get the results. The mantra should be said correctly. There are even prayers that we say, Yadaksharam Parabrasta, at the end of reciting different mantras or different prayers, we say, oh God, please forgive me for making mistakes when chanting the mantra. There's another very famous story. I don't know if it's an actual historical account, but there's a story that there was a man who was a devotee of Vishnu, and he was very, very ignorant of Sanskrit grammar. So in Sanskrit grammar, we have, for instance, here Narayanaya. Narayanaya is unto Narayana. My obeisance is unto Narayana. I would say Om Narayanaya Namaha. Right? Narayanaya, unto Narayana, my obeisances. Right? But he wanted to say my obeisances to Vishnu. So he thought, I will take Vishnu and I'll add Aya to it. But of course, we don't say Vishnaya, we say Vishnave, because Vishnu is a U ending noun, Narayana is an A ending noun. So we say Narayanaya, but we say Vishnave, right? So Narayanaya Namaha, Vishnave Namaha is correct Sanskrit. But he didn't know correct Sanskrit, he didn't know the grammar. So he was thinking, I'll just add Aya to the word Vishnu when I offer my obeisances to Vishnu. So he said, Om Vishnaya Namaha, Om Vishnaya Namaha. And the Lord even accepted that. The Lord accepted that praise, even though it was incorrect grammar. So we shouldn't, of course, we should try to pray correctly, with correct grammar and everything like that. But if, in case we don't, right, here it's being said that even the Om Namo Narayana mantra, even if it's said incorrectly, it still achieves the result. We still get the fruit of chanting that mantra, right? And as we were discussing a little bit this morning, also in the Narayana Upanishad, it says, Om Namo Narayanayati Mantropasakaha, that person who worships or chants this Om Namo Narayana mantra, Vaikuntara Bhuvana Lokam Gamishiti. He will go to Sri Vaikuntha Loka, right? He will go to moksha, to eternal service to Sriman Narayana. So Nanjir is saying here, that's the reason that Nam Alwar just said Naranam here. Why? Nam Alwar knows what the mantra is. Nam Alwar knows Om Namo Narayana. He knows the whole Narayana. He knows the whole mantra. But why does he just simply say this? Why does he say it incorrectly? He says it incorrectly to show us all that even incorrectly it works. That even it can be chanted incorrectly, it works. The reason he gives is that unlike other mantras, this mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, gives its results even if said improperly. So that's the purport given by Nanjir as to why Nam Alwar says it like this. So, in Tiruvaimoli, to continue on, in another part, so that was about Tiruvaimoli 10.5.1, and in another part of the Tiruvaimoli, 1.2.10, Nam Alwar says, to take the strong feet of the illustrious Narayana. Take the strong feet of the illustrious Narayana. So what it means is, it means grasp hold of the feet of the Supreme Lord, means actually to do surrender, to surrender to him. When we fall at the feet of somebody, we're putting our head at their feet, we're putting the top of our body, the highest part of us at the lowest part of them, and we're surrendering to them. So this indicates property. Nanjir introduced. So there's the point. The point that she's making here is that in Tiruvaimoli 1.2.10, which comes before 10.5.1, right? Now Malwar is saying that we should surrender to Narayana, and he's giving the whole word Narayana, whereas later on in 10.5.1, he's simply saying Naranam, not fully Narayana even, right? So now Malwar certainly knew the full name Narayana. He certainly knew the full name Narayana. He shows that in Tiruvaimoli 1.2.10. Why then didn't he use it later on in 10.5.1? Because as we said, he was trying to show that even mispronouncing the name Narayana, right, gives full success. Just like we have that story in the Bhagavatam in the sixth canto of the devotee who was Ajamil, who fell down and who left Vaishnavism. And at the end of his life, he called out for his son, and his son happened to be called Narayana. So, Sanketyam Parihasyam Vastobam Helanam Eva Vastobam means singing. Stoma Helanam means joking, right? Stobam Helanam Eva Va. Vaikuntanama Grahanam Ashesha Grahanam Vidu. So in that section, okay, so in that section, which is very important, the Sriman in that point, the point is that the word Narayana, even said jokingly or singing in for sing-song way, or meaning my son, not meaning the Supreme Lord, it still has the same effect. So Nanjir introduces the hymn by saying, in the 10th stanza, he presents the Tiru mantra and advises one to remember that mantra and its meaning for the rest of one's life. So that's the commentary by Nanjir on Tiruvaimoli 1-10. So we can see this is still in the 12th century, right after Ramanuja. So we can see that Nanjir has understood this, that the Tiru mantra is very important to remember and to meditate on the meaning for the rest of one's life, which is also the commandment of Ramanuja. So the later commentaries on Tiruvaimoli by people like Perivachan Pillai. Perivachan Pillai came later on. Right now what we're doing is we're studying Stotra Ratnam with a commentary by Perivachan Pillai. We can describe Perivachan Pillai as a proto-Tengalai. He was also about in the same time as Pillai Lokacharya. So he was also giving his commentaries were also proto-Tengalai commentaries. So just at the beginning of the differentiation between Wadagalai and Tengalai. So he had also a commentary, the later commentary. He had a commentary, and the Idu, right, of Vadakutir Tiruvidi Pillai are replete with anecdotes showing that the teaching of the secret meanings of the mantras by the Acharya to the qualified disciple had become a Sri Vaishnava institution. Okay, so there were later commentaries than Nanjir's. Remember, Nanjir was in the third quarter of the 12th century. So even after that, in subsequent centuries after that, or subsequent teachers after that, we have these two other commentaries by different Vaishnava acharyas on the works of the Alwars, in which the Tiru mantra is mentioned, right? Showing that the secret mantra, the secret meaning of the mantras by the Acharya was given to the qualified disciples. And it was a established Sri Vaishnava tradition, right? We may cite as an example an incident attributed to Nanjir from the Idu. The Idu. The Idu is a commentary also on Tiruvaimoli. So on the Tiruvaimoli 610.4. Okay, so this is in the commentary the Idu, which is the most famous commentary on Tiruvaimoli, right? And this incident is being described. A man had come to learn at the feet of Nanjir, asking him, right? So again, Nanjir, the disciple of Parasara Bhatta, right? Somebody came to Nanjir and asked him, if God himself is to serve as the means to attain salvation, right? What is the necessity for complete surrender to God, property? God himself is to serve as the means to attain salvation, then what is the necessity for complete surrender to God? Property. Nanjir, hearing this, was flabbergasted. He cried out, saying, "Oh, what a sinner I have been! I have revealed to you an ignoramus, the meaning and purport of Dvayam, which our acharyas have imparted in great confidence and secrecy since the days of Nata Muni." Since the days of Nata Muni, way back, Nata Muni directly got the meanings of the Prabandhas and the Prabandhas from Namawar. So saying, he beat his own head in mortification, repeated inside his bedroom and shut himself in. Retreated inside his bedroom and shut himself in. Right? So he couldn't believe he couldn't believe that he had revealed the meaning and purport of the Dvaya mantra to this person who was so ignorant, who said, if God himself is to serve as the means to attain salvation, what is the necessity of complete surrender to God? Anyway, the point to be understood here is that Nanjir himself has said that these secret meanings of the mantras, including the Dvaya mantra, were being taught in secrecy to the disciples since the times of Nata Muni, since at least the time of Nata Muni. Way, way, way before Ramanuja. So it is not, as people think, sometimes scholars think that Yamunacharya or Ramanuja started a system. They invented something. They cooked up a particular set of doctrines and practices. No, it's always been there. It was there before that. They're simply elaborating on the older tradition. And even this secret understanding, even the secret understanding of the different mantras was there since the time of Nata Muni or even before. So continuing on with Perivachan Pillai, 1167 to 1262, Manipravala commentaries on the Rahasyas became a recognized genre. Okay, so we know this because we're in the process right now of having classes on Stotra Ratna, which is 65 verses by Yamunacharya on the glories of the Lord, Sriman Narayana. He also wrote Chatusloki, 4 slokas on Sri Devi Mahalakshmi. But we're reading the commentary in Manipravala, which is, again, Sanskritized Tamil, right, on Stotra Ratna. So by the time, basically, the third quarter of the 12th century up to the third quarter of the 13th century, which is the lifetime of Perivachan Pillai, right? The Manipravala commentaries became, on Rahasyas, on these secrets, became recognized, right? Recognized granthas. So she's attempting here to show when these commentaries, how they were written down and when they were written down. They were written down in Manipravala, right? Previously, we had Parasarabhata who simply wrote Astasloki, that was in Sanskrit. But then later on, it was all written in terms that the common person could understand. So because it's Tamil mixed with Sanskrit words, it was easy for everybody in Sri Rangam to understand. Those who didn't know pure Sanskrit or couldn't understand the cryptic meaning of the Astaslokis of Parasarabhata. He wrote at least two such works, right? So Perivachan Pillai wrote a lengthy one called Parantarahasya, and a shorter one called Nigamanapati, which supposedly summarizes the previous one, Parantarahasya. There has been some controversy within the Sri Vaishnava community in recent years over whether Perivachan Pillai or his adopted son, Nayanar Achan Pillai, 1227 to 1327, is the author of these works. Okay, so she's just mentioning there's some controversy as to whether the Paranta Rahasya and Nigama Napati. So Paranta Rahasya, Parantara means about the Supreme Lord Parantara, and Rahasya means, or Parantara actually means the Supreme, right? Rahasya means secret, right? And short, Nigama refers to Vedas. The Vedas are called Nigamas. Agama is non-Vedic works. Nigama is Vedic works. And Apati could mean the number of verses in that. So it could be 100 or 1,000 or something like that. Ayurapati usually means 1,000. So Apati, Nigama Napati. I'm not Napati. Not sure exactly how many that means. But it probably refers to the number of granthas or verses in that word. Okay, so there's a bit of a controversy as to whether Periyachan Pillai or his son wrote this. No problem. I don't really, care who wrote it, right? The point is that that even if Periyachan Pillai didn't write it, his son is going to be learning it from him. So it's definitely his ideas, his interpretations of the different Rahasya mantras. Then Periya Tirumuti Araivu attributes both to the elder Periyachan Pillai, and this position seems to be more well-grounded. The translation of Nigamanapati has been included in Appendix 2. So she's given a translation of the second work, which summarizes the first one, as an example of a Rahasya commentary midway between Astasloki, which remember was Parasara Bhatta's 8 verses in Sanskrit, and the Mumuksupadi, which is a much, much longer work and bigger work in Manipravala, both in terms of chronology and length. Its debt to Astasloki is readily apparent, right? So we can see, if we go through that one, when we get to the appendix, we can go through that Nigama Napati, and we'll see that it relies heavily on the Astasloki, the 8 verses of Parasara Bhatta. And the so its debt to Astasloki is readily apparent. Note particularly the paragraph in the Tira Mantra section. So in these books on the mantras, as I said, it'll be taken sequentially. So the first section will be about the Tira Mantra. So in the section about the Tira Mantra, beginning, if one has the notion, that's a quote, this follows the format of Astasloki 4. So if we compare the 4th verse of Astasloki with the section starting, if one has the notion of the Tira Mantra section of Nigama Napati, then we'll see how things are very much the same in both those. But with some difference in the meanings it connects with the letters and the words of Tira Mantra. So the Tira Mantra, every letter in the Tira Mantra, the 8-syllable mantra, every syllable, every letter, in Sanskrit we usually say letter, it means syllable. But of course there are letters and there are syllables. But every letter and every syllable in the mantra has a meaning, which has been described by different acharyas, right? And then the words themselves have meanings. And then the way the words interact have meanings. So this is all going to be discussed. Virtually all of and that's what Rahasya Granthas are. It's analyzing to the nth degree, analyzing as much as possible so we can understand the true meaning of these mantras. Virtually all of the important technical terms and concepts used in the latter and more elaborate, the later and more elaborate commentaries are referred to in the Nigamanapati. Okay, so we can see that in the appendix too when we come to it. Okay, now we're going to have a mention of our author here, the author of Mumuksupadi. Pillai Lokacharya, 1205 to 1311. Now you can see Perivachan Pillai is a little bit before him, 1167 to 1262. So he is a junior contemporary of Pillai Lokacharya, is a junior contemporary of Pillai, Perivachan Pillai. Expanded the tradition. I just sometime I will scan I think I've got it somewhere. I've got a very nice diagram which shows even where the Wadagalais and Tengalais, the different acharyas after Ramanuja, and their dates and how they're related to each other. So somebody can remind me to post that sometime. Pillai Lokacharya, 1205 to 1311, expanded the tradition of the Rahasya commentaries by writing a variety of them of many different lengths. Okay, so Pillai Lokacharya wrote a lot of, and these are called the Astadasa Rahasyas. So there are 18. He wrote actually 18. Okay, so he is known to be as the author of 18 Rahasyas in Manipravala. But not all these Rahasyas were interpretations of the three mantras, right? Because he did also write, also considered Artha Panchagam, right? And Tattvatrayam. These are, see, Artha Panchagam is a work by Pillai Lokacharya. It deals with the five. It divides many things up into five growths. It deals with 5 ways to liberation: karma, jnana, bhakti, prapatti, and acharya abhimana. It deals with five different things. 5 ways of looking at different things. Okay, categorizing things in 5s, and then we have Tattvatraya, which is basically a mini version of Sri Bhashya, which talks about the 3 tattvas, which are Ishvara, Chidachid So sentient, non-sentient, and God, the souls, matter, and God, which is the 3 tattvas, or the 3 principles expounded by the Brahma Sutras in Vedanta philosophy. So he wrote that. That's also considered a Rahasya Grantha. But these 2 books, they don't deal with the actual 3 secret mantras, but they're secret understandings. So they're considered part of these Rahasya Granthas, these Rahasya books. So by the time the genre Rahasya could include almost any doctrinal work in Manipravala. Okay, so basically this Manipravala was considered to be the secret language of doctrine and practice of the Sri Vaishnavas by this point. Of these 18, 4 deal with interpretation of the 3 mantras. They are Yadrityapati, 2 pages, the Mumuksupadi, 15 pages, the Shriyapatipati, 22 pages, and the elaborate Parantapati, 84 pages. 4 deal with the individual mantras. Tani Dwayam on the Dwaya mantra, Tani Charamam on the Charma sloka, and Navida Sambandham, which explains the 9 kinds of relationship between the soul and the Lord, which are shown in the Tiru mantra. And the Tani Pranavam, which deals only with Omkara in the Tiru mantra. So the volume and variety of commentaries produced by Pillai Lokacharya and by his contemporary, right, who lived at the same time as Pillai Lokacharya, Vedanta Deshika, probably show a flowering of interest in the mantras and their interpretation in the late 13th and early 14th centuries. There was no need to make their meanings available to all members of the Sri Vaishnava community, who no doubt represented a wide gamut of different educational qualifications and levels of interest. There was a need to make their meanings available to all members of the Sri Vaishnava community. That's why these things started to be written down, because they wanted these secret doctrines and understandings and realizations to be available to everybody, whereas previously they were given only as oral instruction by different acharyas to certain students. So later on in the 13th and 14th century, it was considered that these meanings should be written down, and they should be therefore available to more of the whole wide community of the Sri Vaishnavas. So there was a need to make these meanings available to all members of the Sri Vaishnava community, who no doubt represented a wide gamut of different educational qualifications and levels of interest. Thus, many such works were composed, from the short and simple to the long and detailed, in order to suit the various capabilities of all. One of the most difficult and elaborate commentaries of this time is that of Pillai Lokacharya's younger brother, the Aruchayal. The word Aruchayal you can read as being Nalaya Divya Prabandham. So the Prabandhas are also called, the 4,000 Tamil verses of the Alwars are also colloquially called Aruchayal. Arulichayal, Rahasya, of Alagiya Manavala Peramal Nayanar. So Pillai Lokacharya's younger brother, who also wrote our Acharya Hridayam, which was a justification to Lord Ranganatha and to all the other skeptics of Vaishnavas in Sri Rangam of Sri Vachana Bhushana, which had very controversial statements about Dharma Shastra and Varnashram. So Pillai Lokacharya was going to be raked over the coals for saying those things, but his younger brother, Alagiya Manavala Peramal Nayanar, right, which is a bit of a mouthful, but Alagiya means beautiful. Alagiya Malavalan is the name of the Lord. Peramal means Vishnu, and Nayanar means, that was his name, Nayanar. So Alagiya Manavala Peramal Nayanar, the younger brother of Pillai Lokacharya, is most famous for this Acharya Hridayam. So who was a specialist on Nalaya Divya Prabandham, like his Acharya Hridayam, which is replete with cryptic allusions to the hymns of the Alwars. So again, we can go through Acharya Hridayam sometime, and perhaps we can get somebody like Dr. Alwar to explain it to us after Mumuksupadi and after Sri Vachana Bhushanam. It's to be studied. So what she's saying here is one of the most difficult and elaborate commentaries was it was of Pillai Lokacharya's younger brother, the author of Acharya Hridayam. So there are other less well-known Rahasya commentaries. Now, of course, we had to mention Vedanta Deshika back here, who's a contemporary of Pillai Lokacharya, right? He wrote his commentaries also. He wrote some minor works of Rahasyas called Chilarai Rahasyangal. Rahasyangal just means Rahasyas in plural. Rahasyangal is plural of Rahasyas. Rahasya, Rahasyangal, plural. And Chilarai means I'm not quite sure what the word Chilarai, but they were short ones. We have those also in English. And his magnum opus of Vedanta Deshika, we can say, in terms of secret doctrines, is the Rahasya Triyasaram. Rahasya means, of course, secret, the secret mantras. Traya means three, the three secrets. Sara means the essence of the three secrets. And he deals with a lot more. Vedanta Deshika in that book deals with a lot more than just the three mantras. He deals with aspects of Varnashram and different things like that, which are more in keeping with the Vadagalai Sampradaya and not with the Tengalai understandings of Pillai Lokacharya and Alagiya Manavala Peramal Nayanar and even Perivachan Pillai, and especially Manavala Mahamuni, who came afterwards. So there are some less known Rahasya commentaries written in the same general period. So there was a person called Vadakeshari Jia. Jia would indicate that he was a sannyasi. Vadikeshari Jia, 1242 to 1350, a disciple of Nayanar Achan Pillai, right? Who, as we know, back here, let's just see. Nayana Achan Pillai, 1227 to 1327, was the adopted son of Periyavachan Pillai. Okay, I hope people are not being too confused about all these different acharyas and when they came and how they're related to each other. But if you would just see it in a diagram, you can understand it. And it takes a while to come to understand all the relationships. It's a much longer tradition than perhaps some people are used to, and so therefore there's a lot more acharyas and a lot more different relationships between them. So this Vadakeshri Jir, a disciple of Nayana Achan Pillai, who was the adopted son of Periyavachan Pillai, wrote a Rahasya Traya, or a book called Rahasya Traya, commentary on the three mantras in Sanskrit, called Rahasya Traya Artha Vivarnam. This word Vivarnam also means explanation, right? So Artha means the meaning of the three mantras. Meaning of the three mantras explained is what the translation of that is. Or it's also called Vadakeshri. Vadikeshri was the name of the person who wrote it, the author. Karika. Karika also is a commentary and an explanation, a karika. So we have, for instance, in Apastamba Sutra, we have something called Karpadi. There was a sage called Karpadi who wrote a commentary on Apastamba Sutra called Karpadi Karika. So Karika means a commentary. Okay, so and which Manavala Mahamuni, who came later, quotes in his Mumuksupadi commentary. Okay, so Manavala Mahamuni had also studied that. So if we want to see that, we have to look at Sutra number or Churna 75, which comes in the book Mumuksupadi, which we haven't started yet. So, I have not been able to consult copies of these texts, unfortunately, though they are extant. So they're available, and if we can come across them, then we can also have a look at them. So she says, I have not been able to consult copies of these texts, unfortunately, though they are extant, so they are available. There are several lost Rahasya commentaries which Periya Tirumuti Adaivu attributes to various acharyas from the 13th and 14th century. Nam Pillai, who was the disciple of Nanjir, right? So again, we have Ramanuja, Govinda, Imbar, Parasara Bhatta, after Parasara Bhatta, Nanjir, after Nanjir, Nam Pillai. The word Pillai means son. Nam means our son. So that Nanjir, his main disciple, is called Nam Pillai. So Nam Pillai's son, Ramanujacharya, so this person Nam Pillai, or this Acharya Nam Pillai, he named his son Ramanujacharya, not to be confused with the original Ramanujacharya, because this is way later, who would have been a contemporary of Periyavachan Pillai, right? So Periyavachan Pillai, starting in the first, Periyavachan Pillai was first part of the 13th century, first quarter of the 13th century, right? Periyavachan Pillai. I'm sorry, last quarter of the 12th century, up to the third quarter of the 13th century, or 12th century, excuse me. Yeah, 11, was it? Yeah, 13th century. Last quarter of the 12th century up to the third quarter of the 13th century. Okay. So, where were we? Okay, so Nam Pillai's son Ramanujacharya, who would have been a contemporary of Periyavachan Pillai, is credited with a Rahasya commentary. Okay? A Sanskrit commentary on the three mantras is also attributed to Sriman Narayana Jia, another sannyasi, who might have been a contemporary of Manavala Mahamuni. Vedanta Deshika, 1269 to 1370, came from a line of acharyas in Kanchipuram who had not shown any interest in the interpretation of the three mantras, right? Now, one of the reasons for this is because in Kanchipuram you have two sides of the city, Vishnu Kanchi and Shiva Kanchi. You have all the Advaitins, you have the Shaivites and the Advaitins, the Smartas on one side, and you have the Vaishnavas basically living on the other side of town where the Vishnu temple is. There's a big Shiva temple called Ekambeshwara, which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually visited both sides. He went to Lord Varadaraja's temple in Little Kanchi, Vishnu Kanchi, and in Big Kanchi, the Shiva Kanchi, he went to see Ekambeshwara, Lord Shiva and Ekambeshwara. Eka Amba Ishwara means the Lord of one mango tree. Okay, so it's they're famous place. There's actually a lot of temples, Vishnu temples and Shiva temples mainly in Kanchipuram. And Kanchipuram is a big center today of the Shankara Sampradaya, Advaita Sampradaya, with the Shankara Kamkoti Pitam of Shankaracharya, the Shankaracharya of Kanchipuram there, which is maybe the fifth seat of the Shankaracharyas in India, because you have Shankara sent his 4 disciples to the 4 corners of India. And so the one in South India is normally the Sringeri Mutt, which is over in Karnataka, but this one is in Tamil Nadu and in Kanchipuram. So Kanchipuram is a big place for, just like Benares, a big place for Mayavadis, for Advaitins. And so Vedanta Deshika and the Vadagalaya Acharyas, the Acharyas from there, was, we can say, proto-Vadagalayas, because it didn't really start to divide until after Vedanta Deshika. They were more interested in fighting off the doctrines and practices of the Smartas and the Advaitis and the Mayavadis, right, and the Shaivites and the Shaktites, so they were just preaching basic Vaishnavism, and then rather than getting into the minute details of the esoteric doctrines of Vaishnavism. First of all, you have to make somebody a Vaishnava. You have to preach to them and explain to them Vaishnavism and explain why the Supreme Lord is Sriman Narayana. After that, then you can start to tell them about the esoteric doctrines of how to worship Lord Narayana and how to surrender to Lord Narayana. But before, when a person is still thinking Shiva is supreme, Devi is supreme, or the whole thing is impersonal, when people are still preaching those sort of doctrines, then you can't get into speaking to them about the esoteric doctrines. Only after they become Vaishnavas and they're actually hankering after understanding the internal and realizations of the doctrines, the secret doctrines, at that time you can try to explain that. So the Acharyas were writing different books. They were writing books against Buddhism, against Jainism, against Mayavada, against Smartas, against Shaivas. They were writing all these sort of books. So they didn't have a lot of time. Vedanta Deshika was prolific, and he wrote like 120 books. So he wrote a lot of books. So he also later on moved from Kanchipuram to Srirangam. So when he moved to Srirangam, he also began to write some books about some of these esoteric mantras like Rahasya Trayasara and the Chilarai Rahasyangal that I mentioned. But up until this point, he didn't. When he was in Kanchipuram, he was born in a place called Tupal, which is a suburb of Kanchipuram. And so he, like all the other acharyas there in Kanchipuram, they were mostly preaching against the non-Vaishnavas, and they didn't show a lot of interest. Well, it's not that they weren't interested, but they had their hands full preaching against the Mayavadis, let's say, preaching against the people that were there, the Smartas. He compensated for this by besting Pillai Lokacharya in the number and volume of commentaries he produced on the 3 mantras. So Vedanta Deshika later on, when he came to Srirangam, although Pillai Lokacharya wrote 18 commentaries, 18 of these Rahasya Granthas or books, right? Vedanta Deshika actually wrote more, and he wrote more prolifically. Rahasya Trayasara is a very long book, like that. He wrote many short and medium-sized Rahasya commentaries in Manipravala, pairing each one of them, each one with an exegesis of the 3 tattvas of Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta philosophy. Thus, his Rahasya Padavi, Rahasya Navanitam, Rahasya Sandesham, Rahasya Ratnavali, Rahasya Syamantrukai, Rahasya Traya Chulakam, Rahasya Sikamani, have companion works entitled Tattva Padavi, Tattva Vanitam, etc. The comparable size and of a comparable size and level of difficulty. Two of these shorter Rahasyas have sub-commentaries which he wrote himself. So not only did Vedantadeshika write original works on Rahasyas, on the Rahasyas, but he also wrote commentaries and sub-commentaries on those works as well. So there's no doubt that Vedantadeshika was prolific, and we should also study his works because he has many, many good things to say. It's not that the Tengalaya Acharyas or the Southern Sri Rangam school Acharyas reject everything that Vedantadeshika wrote. There are a few minor differences that we have, basically on in terms of practice, philosophy and practice. In terms of his emphasis on Varnashram. So as we see, Pilalokacharya and Madhavala Mahamunigal and Pilalokacharya's brother, Alagiya Manavala Peramal Nayanar, all wrote things which are considered to be against certain aspects of Varnashram. So, but they had reasons for it, and they explained it from the Nalaya Divya Prabandham and giving also many quotes from other shastras. So, two of these shorter Rahasyas of Vedantadeshika's have sub-commentaries which he wrote himself. Rahasya Sandesh, Vivarnam, Rahasya Ratnavali, Hridayam. Okay, so that would have been the Rahasya Sandesh Vivarnam would have been a sub-commentary on the Rahasya Sandesham. The Rahasya Ratnavali Hridayam would be an explanation, a sub-commentary on Rahasya Ratnavali, like that. So his best known and most elaborate Rahasya commentary, which some say was the last one that he wrote, right? So we don't know that necessarily, is the Rahasya Traya Saram, which we do have in English and which we could also go through. I'm sure that Dr. Chiranarayan would love to teach that to us. And I would be very happy to study Rahasya Traya Saram under him. But I have gone through Rahasya Traya Saram, and if anybody wants a copy of it, I think we have it in soft copy also. It's available, so we can also read that. Of which only 3 chapters, one for each mantra, are specifically devoted to the interpretation of the 3 mantras. This is what I said before, that Rahasya Traya Saram is a very big book. It's a huge book, but there's only 3 chapters on the 3 mantras. The rest of it deals with other aspects of Vaishnavism, including how Vaishnavas relate to rules in the Dharma Shastras and Varnashram. So one chapter deals with the 3 tattvas, right? Remember what the tattva traya are, the 3 tattvas, Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. Chit, Achit, Ishvara. Chit means the souls, jivas, the jivatmans, right? Achit means insentient matter, and Ishvara means the Supreme Person, God, right? It's Chit, Achit, Ishvara. These are 3 tattvas, and the rest is an exhaustive analysis of nearly every aspect of Sri Vaishnava doctrine and practice. It's clear that one of Vedantadeshika's chief concerns in this work is to refute or soften the doctrinal claims and interpretations made by Pillai Lokacharya, Alagiya Manavala Peramal Nayanar, Pillai Lokacharya's younger brother, and their colleagues in the Sri Rangam school, the Tengalaya Acharyas. So it's obvious that when Sri Vedantadeshika, coming from Kanchipuram, he came to Sri Rangam and he was living in Sri Rangam, and he saw that the Sri Rangam Acharyas were writing in such a way that he challenged that on certain aspects of Varnashram. He had some idea to challenge those things. Now, my own study, my personal feeling is that Vedantadeshika may not have had access to some of the commentaries which were still being kept secret, although they were written down, like the Idu, which is the most important commentary on Tirabai Moli. So because he didn't have that, necessarily the access to that secret information as a person coming from Kanchipuram and not particularly being a disciple of somebody there in Sri Rangam. He may have had his own ideas. Anyway, he had his own realizations about certain doctrines and practices, which end up becoming the basis for the Wadagalai Sampradaya. And whereas the Tengalais, the majority of Sri Vaishnavas, by the way, are Tengalais, and but it's more or less like a Catholic Protestant split in Christianity, except that the Protestants in this case are first. The Tengalais were the original and the first group, and the Wadagalais seemed to become as a reaction by the Acharyas who had to deal with the non-Vaishnavas in Kanchipuram and deal with that sort of thing. So anyway, so Manavala Mahamuni, who came later at the third quarter of the 14th century, 1370 to 1443, following in the lineage of the Sri Rangam school after Vedanta Deshika, right? So basically you find, okay, so Perivachan Pillai, Pillai Lokacharya, and his younger brother Alagiya Manavala Perumal Nayanar, and some other Sri Rangam acharyas. They've written in the Tengalai way, Proto-Tengalai way. And so then Vedanta Deshika comes along. He comes from Kanchipuram. He settles down in Sri Rangam. He begins to write things in the same way, explanations about the three mantras also, but he also gives his realizations as to how Vaishnava doctrine and practice should be understood, which is a little different from the way the Tengalais, the Proto-Tengalais did. And therefore, then you get Manavala Mahamuni coming along just after Vedanta Deshika, or at the same time or just after Vedanta Deshika. Let's see, Vedanta Deshika actually they were not contemporaries because Vedanta Deshika passed away in 1370. Manavala Mahamuni is born in 1370. So then Manavala Mahamuni is born, and he sees all of this, that there's a Tengalai Acharyas speaking like this about these secret doctrines, and the Wadagalai Acharyas, the Proto-Wadagalai Acharyas speaking like this. But then there's these slight differences, and Vedanta Deshika is trying to refute certain things of Sri Vachanabhushanam and Acharya Hridam by the Tengalai Acharyas. And so therefore, what Manavala Mahamuni comes along and he tries to explain it and to reaffirm, because Vedanta Deshika was a very powerful writer, so naturally his books have a lot of sway also. And so Manavala Mahamuni comes to reaffirm the Tengalai position. And that's why he's considered to be the last and greatest Tengalai Acharya. And to prove that, Lord Ranganath himself made the Pranam Mantra or Taniyan for Manavala Mahamuni. When Manavala Mahamuni was preaching in the Sri Rangam temple, a small boy appeared and chanted, composed the Sri Shailesha Dayapatram Dibhakyadi Guranavam Yithindam Bhanavam Bande Rami Jamat Ramunim, which is the way we always start our pranams to the Guru Parampara, ending in Manavala Mahamuni. That Taniyan or that Pranam Mantra was composed by Lord Ranganatha himself, showing that Lord Ranganatha himself enjoyed the exposition of Manavala Mahamuni and therefore accepted him as his guru, which we spoke about before. In the last session, we talked about what's called Oranvali Acharya Guru Parampara. Oranvali means in the form of a garland, is the Tengalai Guru Parampara, is in the form of a garland, starting with Lord Ranganatha and coming back through Manavala Mahamuni, through Ramanuja, and then through Manavala Mahamuni, again to Lord Ranganatha as a disciple of Manavala Mahamuni. So, Manavala Mahamuni, following the lineage of the Sri Rangam school after Vedanta Deshika, was in a unique position to affirm the doctrinal positions of Pillai Lokacharya and the other Tengalai Acharyas et al. Against the criticisms of Vedanta Deshika. Rather than writing independent Rahasya commentaries and doctrinal treatises of his own, Manavala secured the importance of the works of his predecessors, meaning Perivachan Pillai, Pillai Lokacharya, and Pillai Lokacharya's younger brother, Alagiya Manavala Perumal Nayanar, right? By writing commentaries, detailed explanations, and elaborations on their works, right? Writing lucid commentaries on them. In his introduction, he says that Pillai Lokacharya's Mumuksupadi was already the most widely read Rahasya commentary of the time. So looking back, Vedanta Deshika, at the time when Manavala Mahamuni wrote this, Vedanta Deshika had passed away, Pillai Lokacharya had passed away, right? Manavala Mahamuni said, between the Rahasya Trayasaram and the commentaries of Vedanta Deshika and the commentaries of Pillai Lokacharya, Pillai Lokacharyas were more popular, more widely read at the time. This is what I said. The Tengalai branch of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya is much bigger in numbers than the Vadagalai. But no doubt his commentary, known as the Tira Mantrartham, enhanced its status even more. So the Mumuksupadi, this Mumuksupadi was the most famous and was the most popular and most widely read commentary on the three mantras at the time of Manavala Mahamuni, 1370 to 1443, right? Okay. But he says that this other commentary, his commentary known as Tira Mantrartham, the meaning of Tira Mantra, enhanced its status even more. Manavala Mahamuni seems to have been a very popular and influential sectarian leader. By gathering around himself a host of loyal disciples, he had actually 8 main disciples called the Asta Dig Gajas. The word Gaja means, in Sanskrit, elephant. Dig means directions. So there's 8 directions, right? There's north, south, east, and west, and in between, right? 8 directions. So the Asta Dig Gajas are an allusion to Puranic cosmology. In Puranic cosmology, the world is held up on the hoods of an Antashesha, who is on the top of a tortoise, and or whatever. But it's all being held up by 8 elephants, 8 big elephants in the corners, in the 8 directions. So Manavala Mahamuni's disciples, the Astadigajas, right, are the ones that are known to hold up the Tengalai doctrines and practices. They're the ones who went and preached Manavala Mahamuni's exposition on his acharyas, the other proto-Tengalai acharyas, doctrines and practices. If you want to see these 8 Astadigajas, there are deities of them on the outside of Manavala Mahamuni's mutt in Sri Rangam in Southeast Uttara Street. If you go to Southeast Uttara Street and you see the Manavala Mahamuni's mutt, there is said to be the original mutt of Ramanuja. Ramanuja had a mutt that he lived in, and that's considered to be, later on it was Manavala Mahamuni's. In fact, Manavala Mahamuni is considered by Tengalai Acharyas to be an incarnation of Ramanuja. And that's why we see a Shesha behind any deity of Manavala Mahamuni that you see a little Shesha, an Antashesha, a snake head behind his head, indicating that he's an incarnation of Shesha, according to some people. So these Astadigajas are all there on the top of the gateway entering into the mutt of Manavala Mahamuni, and where his original sandals are kept. They're gold plated, of course, and you can go and they can touch you on the head with those. And it's a wonderful place. It's about a block from my house in Sri Rangam. So Manavala Mahamuni seems to have been very popular and influential sectarian leader by gathering around himself the host of loyal disciples and by expounding doctrinal positions of Pilalokacharya and his colleagues, he defined the theology of what would later be known as the Tengalai school, or the Southern school, or the Sri Rangam school, we can call it. So there's a Sri Rangam school. The Sri Rangam is like the Vatican. So there's the Vatican, the Sri Rangam school, and then there's the Kanchipuram school, right? So it's very similar to Christianity, where you had the Catholic and the Protestant school, but in this case, the people who are more liberal, the Protestants, are the Tengalais, and that's the older tradition in the Sri Rangam tradition, and the northern tradition of Kanchipuram is the Wadagalai tradition, the tradition expounded by Vedanta Deshika. So we can say Vedanta Deshika and people before him, and Pilalokacharya and people before him, they were like they were the beginning of the Wadagalais and the beginning of the Tengalais. We can't really say that Vedanta Deshika was a Wadagalai, but although the doctrines that he espoused, the minute ideas that he espoused, came to become tenets of Wadagalai Sri Vaishnavism. So, however, there's no evidence that during Manavala Mahamuni's time there was any clear consciousness of there being two rival factions of the Sri Vaishnava tradition. So even at the time of Manavala Mahamuni, which is, late 14th century up to the middle of the 15th century, right? Still, people were not. There wasn't a clear differentiation between Wadagalai and Tengalai, or northern and southern schools. The idea that there were two schools of thought in Sri Vaishnavism, one centered around Kanchi and the works of Vedanta Deshika, the Wadagalai or northern school, and the other centered around Sri Rangam and Manavala Mahamuni and the authors he revered, the Tengalai or southern school, did not arise till at least the 16th century. So it took a couple of hundred years after these works were written. Even after Manavala Mahamuni, took a couple of hundred years, 200 or 300 years, before there was a full-blown differentiation between these two schools. The full-blown Tengalai-Wadagalai schism, with its bitter rivalry over temple control, there are 108 holy places according to the of the Alwars, and then there are also other holy temples, right? Out of those other 108 really holy temples, of course, we only have 106 in this world, right? Two of them are Sri Vaikunta and the Ocean of Milk. But out of those 106, right, I believe 6 or 8 are controlled by Wadagalais, and the rest, 98 to 100, are controlled by Tengalais. So you can see there's a big difference in the control of the Sampradaya and the extent of the Sampradaya by the Wadagalais and Tengalais. You also find things like, for instance, Tengalais tend to emphasize going to the temple and performing worship of the Lord in the temple and service to the Lord in the temple. And because they run most of the temples. And when the Wadagalais don't emphasize that, although they readily go to temples and worship in temples, but they emphasize more the daily practice, their own daily practice in the house and the worship in the house, because they didn't run a lot of temples. So they were excluded from a lot of services in temples. So, but interestingly enough, you also find the fact that in places like Sri Rangam, you have a Tengalai-controlled temple with Wadagalai priests. And you similarly find in other places, you find a Wadagalai-controlled temple with Tengalai priests. So we can see that this split didn't happen overnight, and it happened over a period of a few hundred years. And even today, there are many, many people who don't take much notice in actual practicality of the difference. You'll see people, everybody considers themselves to be a follower of Ramanuja and Sri Vaishnava, and very few people are fanatically Wadagalai and Tengalai and will not. And again, it's like Christianity. Everybody's a follower of Jesus, but okay, you've got your church, we've got our church. We have some slight differences. That's all. So The full-blown Wadagalai-Tengalai schism, with its bitter rivalry over temple control, erupted even later than that, in the late 17th and 18th centuries. And even today, you find sometimes I have a whole book about the court cases that went on during the British Raj, the British period of occupation of India, between the Wadagalais and Tengalais. You know, whether they wear different forms of tilak, the Y and the U, and whether the temple elephant in Kanchipuram or in Sri Rangam should wear Wadagalai tilak or Tengalai tilak went to the Supreme Court of India. All these sort of issues, the very famous whether when doing the prayers in the Gosti, when they have Satamurai, which is the end of Sri Vaishnava worship in a temple or in a house like that, and they give out the Tirtha Gosti. Tirtha Gosti means when they're giving people Charanamrita in the temple at the end of the worship. The priest comes out, everybody's praying. So whether they start the prayer with a pranam to Vedanta Deshika or a pranam to Manavala Mahamuni became a hot issue. And obviously in the Tengalai temples, they all start with the prayer to Manavala Mahamuni. In the Wadagalai temples, they all start with the prayer to Vedanta Deshika. And you'll find, even though, for instance, like the same thing, even though we're studying Stotra Ratna with a commentary by Perivachan Pillai, so we say Perivachan Pillai's pranam mantras before we start that class. The person who's teaching us that is a Wadagalai Sri Vaishnava, Dr. Tiran Ryan. So naturally, he also says that we should chant Vedanta Deshika's pranam mantras. If he was a Tengalai Acharya, he would probably insist that we chant Manavala Mahamuni's pranam mantras, even though we're not studying either Vedanta Deshika's or Manavala Mahamuni's commentary on that, but Perivachan Pillai's. So, it's just become one of those things that people try to insist on different things. And even today we find there are sometimes you see on TV in Tamil Nadu that in Kanchipuram there was a group of devotees, and they were getting together and they were praying towards the Lord, and they started the Tengalais started chanting the Divya Prabandham, and the Wadagalais came and they tried to also start chanting along with them, and there was a bit of a tussle, and they said, no, you shouldn't chant because you're Wadagalais and we're Tengalais, and we have only the permission. If you go to Sri Rangam, it's the same thing. There's whenever the Lord goes on procession in the streets of Sri Rangam, right? In the front of the Lord's procession are the Prabandha Gosti, right? There's Sri Vaishnavas in the front, because it's a Tengalai temple. There's a bunch of Tengalais in the front of the procession chanting from the 4,000 hymns. And at the end of the procession, they chant from the Vedas. So they have some Tengalais at the end, in the beginning and the end, chanting the hymns of the Alwars, and at the end chanting the Vedas. Okay, so like that, because it's a Tengalai temple, only Tengalais can stand in front and chant the hymns of the Alwars. Only Tengalais can stand at the back and chant the Vedas. But the Wadagalais decided we also want to chant the Vedas, and we want to offer some service by doing that. So that's fine. So they stand. Another group of devotees stand behind the Tengalais at the end, chanting the Vedas. So they have the Wadagalai Gosti. So the Gosti means a group of people, a sabha, a group of Brahmins got together to do something. So in the beginning of the procession, you have the group of Tengalais chanting the Prabandhas. And at the back, you have, first of all, you have the Tengalais chanting Vedas. Then you have a group of Wadagalais chanting other Vedas, right? And then just recently, what I saw the last time I was there, they introduced a third group back there, another group. So you got the Tengalais chanting Vedas, the Wadagalais chanting Vedas. Then you have another group of Wadagalais who are chanting Samaveda instead of chant. So you have the Samavadis decided that they wanted their own group, and they wanted to serve the Lord by chanting Samaveda also, because the other two groups were chanting Yajurveda. Okay. So everybody's got their own group, and and they're all allowed to worship the Lord. But then if you want to go in the first group, you've got to only be Tengelite because it's a Tengelite temple. So if you want to go and worship the Lord, you can, but you have to stand behind the official group and you have to have your next group. So there's all sorts of protocols like that. Who is given the first Charanamrita in the temple? There are certain families, there are certain people who has to do the service in some of these big temples. Now, in little temples, in more modern temples, it's not like that. But in these ancient temples where the whole procedure has been codified for the last 1,000 years or more, right? You get these traditions, okay? So these traditions are being followed. So the traditions even outdate the whole Wadagalai-Tengalai split. Nonetheless, the major doctrinal positions of what would eventually become Tengalai and Wadagalai sects were fairly well defined in the works of Manavala Mahamuni and Vedanta Deshika, since many of those doctrinal differences arose in the context of interpreting the three mantras. A comparison of Manavala Mahamuni's commentary on Mumuksupadi with the interpretation seen in Vedanta Deshika's Rahasya Trayasara will shed light on some of the major areas of dispute between the two schools, and that's what we should do. We should look at Rahasya Trayasaram, we should look at Mumuksupadi with the commentary of Manavala Mahamuni and compare them, and that will give us a very good understanding of the slight differences between the Wadagalai and Tengalai schools. Before doing that, however, something should be said about the variety and the similarity in the sources we find used in Rahasya commentaries. Basically, the works cited in interpreting the three mantras run the gamut of the entire range of literature accepted as authoritative by the Sri Vaishnava tradition. On the Sanskrit side, this includes the Vedic Samhitas and Upanishads, the epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, which also comes from the Mahabharata, Puranas, especially the Sattvic Puranas, right? Dharma Shastras like Manu, Apastamba, Parasara Smriti, Vishnu Smriti, Yagyabhakti Smriti, and the Pancharatra Agamas. The Pancharatra Agamas means there are many Agama Samhitas, but mainly we have a Ratnatraya, we have three main Pancharatra Samhitas, and maybe if people want to know a little bit more about the Pancharatra school and the Pancharatra Samhitas, we can have a separate class on that. The Tamil hymns of the Alwars are cited freely, as are the works of previous acharyas. Ramanuja's commentaries, his bhasyas, his gadyas, his prose works, his Vedanta Sangraha, which is his commentary on the Upanishads, on the major Upanishads. The Stotras of Yamunacharya, which we mentioned before. Chatusloki, four verses on Mahalakshmi, and Stotra Ratnam, 65 verses on the glories of the Lord. Stotras of Kurat Alwarn, right? And Parasara Bhatta, we have of Kurat Alwarn, we have what's called Panchastava. There are five important stotras by Kurat Alwarn. Of Parasara Bhatta also wrote a commentary on Vishnu Sahasranama, Bhagavad Guna Darpanam, right? Which is a mirror of the auspicious qualities of the Lord, right? Bhagavad Guna Darpanam. And earlier Rahasya commentaries, which she already mentioned, starting with Asta Sloki of Parasara Bhatta. Anecdotes and sayings of the previous acharyas also commonly referred to for support or illustration. Analogies and similes from everyday life in those days are similarly utilized for support and illustration. The similarity of sources cited across the board in all of the Rahasya commentaries bears witness to a strong and long-standing oral tradition. Right. So these are some of the reasons why she explains that not only these books of esoteric doctrines, which came later, but there is definitely a strong oral tradition of teaching these secret things, these secret doctrines. In any given context, you may find Perivachan Pillai, Pillai Lokacharya, Vedanta Deshika, and Manavala Mahamuni all appealing to the same citation from Itihasa Purana or Pancharatra, the same anecdote or simile, and or the same verses from the Alwars, right? So there's very, very much agreement in these essential, esoteric, secret doctrines and interpretations of the mantras, and even on many other points. There's so much that is similar and is the same. Though differences in interpretation do arise, especially between Vedanta Deshika and the Sri Rangamacharyas on the interpretation of the Charma Sloka, as will be explained below. Much more so, specifically, she is highlighting the differences that Vedanta Deshika and the Sri Rangamacharyas have on the Charma Sloka, because basically it comes down to the Tengalaya Acharyas say Sarvadhamma Priteja means give up Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga as a form of self-effort. Just give them up, like that. Whereas Vedanta Deshika says if you are qualified to perform Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, and he gives certain qualifications and which perhaps other people don't accept, but he gives some stringent qualifications to be qualified for those things, then you should perform those things, and that those are also legitimate. Whereas the Tengalaya Acharyas tend to say, no, they're not really legitimate because they involve that small amount of false ego. Thinking that you're actually doing something, that your efforts are contributing towards your liberation. So in Charma Sloka, there's a little bit more of a distinction between the Wadagalayas and Tengalayas. Much more unanimity than difference will be found between the Rahasya commentaries of any two authors of the different Kalais. The closer any two Rahasya commentaries are in length, the more likely they are to cite the same number and type of sources. One point to be noted, however, Vedanta Deshika is consistent with his view that the Vedas should not be read by women or Sudras, right? So Vedanta Deshika is very strong on the Varnashram rules that women and Shudras, or people who are lower than Shudras, like Mlechas and foreigners and Chandalas and Yavanas and Swapatas, right? These sort of people, right, should not be able to read the Shruti or the Vedas, right? Refrains from quoting. He refrains from quoting any sources of the Shruti in his Manipravala Rahasya commentaries, which are liable to be read by anyone in the Sri Vaishnava community. So those people, the reason, like we said, of writing in Manipravala, which is mixed Sanskrit and Tamil, is so that everybody could read it. The lay folk, the Sri Vaishnavas in Sri Rangam and in Kanchipuram who didn't know Sanskrit, like the Sudras and the women or whatever, the lower caste people. So they could read these books, and therefore in those books, which were written in Manipravala by Vedanta Deshika, he never quotes the Veda, because he believes that those people can't read the Veda. They shouldn't be allowed to read the Veda. That's the rule. The Tengalaya Acharyas, however, do not hold to this view. Thus, Manavala Mahamuni's commentary cites the Upanishads and Samhitas where appropriate. Even though those commentaries by the Tengalayas are also in Manipravala. They're liable to be read by women and by Shudras, by any person who just knows the local vernacular language, which was Tamil.
So it sounds like because of the more liberal view of the Tengalayas acharyas, that the Tengalayas became much bigger than the Vadakalayas.
Yeah.
That's because of this, isn't it? Yeah. So they're limiting themselves by being elite, Huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're limiting themselves. It's, Brahmins are elite, right?
Yeah.
If you divide society into you first of all you divide society into male and female.
Yeah.
And then if you say out of the males, only the Brahmins can do these certain things, then that's elitist. Of course, that's elitist.
That's elite. That's elite. Yeah.
Yeah. So naturally, you're going to have less followers.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing in other forms of Vaishnavism too. Like in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, they talk about Raganuga Bhakti. So if you say, okay, only if you chant 100,000 names of God a day or 300,000 names of God a day are you considered not fallen.
Yeah.
Then you like, there's very few people who can do that, who are doing that.
Yeah.
So if you make the more rules and regulations that you bring in, social rules and things like that, and if you cut people off, and see, Vedanta Deshika is cutting people off from the knowledge also. No, you're a Sudra or you're a woman or something like that. You shouldn't read the Vedas. You shouldn't chant Omkara. You shouldn't read the Vedas. So therefore, I'm not going to include in a book that's written in a language that you can understand. I'm not going to include even those quotes from the Vedas that help to prove our philosophy.
Yeah.
Right? It would be like saying, yes, you can come to the temple and you can see the deity, but you're
but he's
from
also but that's also not in the line of Ramanuja himself, because he was freely associating with Sudra Vaishnavas. So
yeah, I mean he was okay. There's always been Sudra Vaishnavas there. There's even amongst the Alwars, you have Tirupan Alwar, who was considered like a Sudra. He was sitting by the side of the river meditating and singing the name of God, and he was in trance and he had his eyes closed. When the Pujari came from the temple, he wanted him to move to the side, not to contaminate him, while he's going down to get water from Lord Ranganath to bring back for Ranganath's puja. And so he threw a little pebble, he threw a rock at this Alwar to wake him up from his ecstatic trance, singing the names of God, and hit him in the head, and some blood came from his head, and so it committed a big offense against the Alwar, but he wanted to get him out of the way so he could walk down and not touch him, going to the river to get the water for the deity's worship. But later the Lord came to him and said, no, you have to honor this guy. This guy is low class, but he's born in a low caste, but he's a great devotee. So you have to actually bring him on your shoulders into the deity room. So that's there in the Alwars. Even Nam Alwar is not considered to be he's not a Brahmin. So the thing is, so even what to speak of Ramanuja, during the time of Ramanuja, that said that Ramanuja was very old. He used to go down to the river to bathe. When you're going to the river to bathe, you're unclean. You got up and you're unclean. You have to go to the river to bathe in the river and become clean. He used to lean on a Brahmin devotee to go down, and when he was coming back, he would lean on touch a Sudra Vaishnava, a Vaishnava who was born a Sudra. So that was showing that he felt that because a person's a Vaishnava, he's pure, whether he's a Shudra or a Brahmin. And the same thing, when he was in his married life, Ramanuja wanted to take the remnants of the foodstuffs of one of the disciples of Yamunacharya, who was also a Sudra.
Yeah.
Kanchipurna. There's a person called Kanchipurna who could speak to the deity in Kanchipuram of Varadaraja, but he was a great devotee, but he was not. Ramanuja wanted to be his disciple, but he said, no, I can't be your guru because society would not agree to this. This was in Kanchipuram. Society in Kanchipuram will not accept that you become my disciple because you're a Brahmin and I'm a Shudra. So you cannot be initiated by me, not because he was a disciple of Yamuna, so he could have given him initiation, but he was a Shudra. So he didn't give Ramanuja initiation. Ramanuja took initiation from somebody else who was a Brahmin. But that's because he had to follow even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He would eat what his Brahmin disciples would cook at their houses and offer to their shalagrams in their puja rooms. But when he was invited to eat at a Sudra's house, a person who was his great devotee, who was a Shudra, that person would go and buy Jagannath Prasadam cooked by Brahmins and feed Lord Chaitanya with that Brahmin food. Lord Chaitanya wouldn't eat food that wasn't cooked by a Brahmin. So,
Yeah.
these we can understand that these acharyas, sometimes they had to follow the social rules, but they were always trying to be more progressive. Vedanta Deshika is an example of somebody who's trying to establish the regressive rules of Varnashram on people rather than be progressive. He didn't want to be progressive. He wanted to stick to the letter of the Dharma Shastras and follow them, right? Whereas the Tengalaya Acharyas saw the example of the Alwars and the Acharyas like Ramanuja, and they were progressive. They became progressive. And this progressive idea is there in the Pancharatra also, that everybody can take initiation, Pancharatric initiation, whereas Vedic initiation was only there for the Brahmin boys. So there's this, both things are there in certain scriptures. It just depends. What's more important to you? Is the Pancharatra and the Nalaya Divya Prabandham and the Vaishnava Shastras more important to you, or are the Dharma Shastras like Manusmriti and the ones that control the etiquettes of social interaction in society, are those more important to you? Are those more important Shastras to you? And Vedanta Deshika, he chose the Dharma Shastras. These are more important to him. It's not that the others aren't important, but these are more important. If it's between the two, he chooses the Dharma Shastras as more important. The Tengalayas choose the other ones as more, the Vaishnava system as being more important, and Varnashram as being less important, those things. And I would have to say today, especially in the context of preaching to people all over the world, Varnashram is not important. It's an outdated system. It's an outdated, outmoded system, which is only practiced only a little bit, only a slight percentage by a very few people in India. Out of all the people in India, out of all the Brahmins in India, like the whole population of India, maybe 2% of Brahmins, 2% of the society of Brahmins. Okay, and now they don't even really distinguish between Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and anybody. You're either a Brahmin or a non-Brahmin. You're either a Brahmin or you're everything. You're low, right? So they don't even care about Kshatriyas and Vaishyas anymore. It's just Brahmins and non-Brahmins. And if you're a Brahmin, okay, you're 2% of the population. Now in Trichy district, in Sri Rangam, maybe 90% of the people in Trichy district are Brahmins. But overall in India, only 2%. So of course, when there's big centers where there are temples, there's a lot of Brahmins that live around the temples. Like if you go to Sri Rangam, the first 2 streets around the temple, the holy streets where the deity goes in procession, everybody who lives there is Brahmin. When I bought a house in that area, that was very controversial, 1993 or 1994. When I bought a house there, it was like, there goes the neighborhood. Here the Malechas are moving in to the Agraharam, which is the Brahmin neighborhood around the temple. So people were like, whoa, what do you guys keep in your fridge? They wanted to come and see that you want to live in this area. You want to live in our neighborhood, the Brahmin neighborhood. Are you actually willing to live like Brahmins? Are you living like Brahmins? When they found out that we live like Brahmins, we followed their customs, then they accepted it. They accepted us. I mean, theoretically, we're not accepted because obviously we're Westerners. We're not Brahmins. We're not Brahmins by birth, by caste. So, but after a while of seeing us there and seeing the way that we live our lives, just the same as Brahmins, as Brahminical people, then we become accepted like that because of our qualities and the way we do things like that. So somehow or other we become accepted. But in general, if you ask people even today, even Tengalayas, they'll still have a lot of reverence for the social issues of Varnashram. Now, but in the context of the whole world, in the context of even greater India, right? How important are all those rules, which only apply mainly to 2% of the population of India and 0% practically of the rest of the world? Those rules of Varnashram are you know, all these. Now, there are some people today who have this idea that they want to reestablish all the rules of Varnashram and Varnashram society like that. It'll be a failure. It'll be a failure. You can't establish it, not in the way that it's written in the scriptures. If you want to establish it in a different way, if you want to look back at the Vedas and see what the actual meaning of a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra is, according to the Vedas, when the Lord says in Purusha Shukta, Brahmanosya Makumasid, Bahu Rajanyakutaha, Uru Tarasyad Vaishyaha Padbyam Sudro Jayata. The Lord says that there are these 4 types of people. Even in the Gita, he says there's 4 types of people. There's 4 types of people who turn towards me, 4 types of people who turn away from me. These are Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras. There are intellectuals, there are administrators and politicians, there are and military people, there are merchants or business people or entrepreneurs, and then there are also the working class in every society of the world. Down through history, there have been. But if you think you're going to set up a system like there was in medieval Europe of barons and popes and serfs, you know, slaves who are working the farm, that's craziness. You're not going to set up a society like medieval Europe again. I mean, not unless we go back to living like cavemen, living like agrarian, you know, we have an agrarian based civilization where everybody's a farmer like that. So if you go out and preach today and you try to make people Vaishnavas, right? And you say, okay, now what we want you to do is we want you to join this religion, but guess what? In order to do that, we want you to become a subsistence farmer, a subsistence rice farmer. Who's a farmer these days like that? That's all taken care of. There's machinery and there's so many things going on, and that's all being done. Most people don't become subsistence farmers here in modern times. So if you want to do that, the people who want to do that are considered crazy, right? There's a couple of times when they tried to do things like that. One was Pol Pot in Cambodia said, okay, no more money, no more intellectuals, no more anything. Everybody drop what you're doing, leave the cities, go out in the farm and grow rice, no matter what you are, right? And that was a complete disaster. Millions of people were killed, right, at the reign of Pol Pot. So that's the sort of thing you're talking about if you're trying to reintroduce Varnashram today. If you really want to do it, then you're talking about being like Pol Pot, like one of the greatest mass murderers of history, right? But or for instance, like what happened in the Russian Revolution, you know, when people overthrew the Tsar and they decided that everybody would be the same, and communism, and you know, everybody would have an equal go of it. But if you look at Russia today, it's not like that at all. If you look at China today, it's not like that at all. There are Vaishyas and Kshatriyas. There are entrepreneurs in China and Russia. There are businessmen. There are politicians, and there are workers. It's the same as it was. It's just instead of the Tsar, instead of the Emperor of China, they have a central political committee. So you can't get away from the Lord's divisions in society. But you also are not going to have, in the same way as the Dharma Shastras in the medieval Dharma Shastras in India,